So the war in Palestine. One reason it came up, I'm pretty sure, is because of Netanyahu being in Washington D.C. Another reason is probably because of the protests that were happening in Washington D.C. And I am a strong supporter of the right to protest. I think that protesting makes a difference. The fact that people are asking questions about this war who were not asking questions necessarily a couple weeks ago demonstrates that protesting raises awareness of issues. However, it's never okay uh, to commit property crimes. Your protest should not include breaking windows, spray painting buildings, those sorts of things. It's interesting, though, that I have yet to hear anybody call the protests that were in Washington this week an insurrection. Um, there were people protesting. There were people defacing government buildings. Dare I say, sacred government buildings. I wouldn't use that term sacred, but they do. But so you have people protesting and out in the streets, and nobody called it an insurrection because it wasn't, and neither was January 6th. Let's be real. These were protests that involved property crime. The property crime needs to be addressed. Just like Black Lives Matter, the property crimes needed to be addressed. But that doesn't make it an insurrection. That doesn't mean that you throw people in solitary confinement for years at a time. You don't do it now with these protests that are happening in Washington, D.C. Trump wants to throw people in jail for burning the flag. You don't throw people in jail for burning a flag, especially if it's a flag that they own. Now, if they steal somebody else's flag and burn that, I could understand that would be a problem. But if you own a flag and you burn it, I mean, it might not be the most respectable thing to do, but it is your right from a libertarian perspective, because libertarianism is the belief in the non-aggression principle, that you do not initiate acts of aggression against somebody else. And burning your own flag is not harming anybody. It's not punching anybody in the face. It's not destroying anybody's property. It's not taking anybody's stuff. It's just having a little fire. So the protests, again, as far as their protests, good for them. As far as their committing property crimes, that needs to stop. And it doesn't help the cause when people are out committing property crimes. So on that issue of the non-aggression principle, libertarians apply that to everyone. A lot of people hear the non-aggression principle, that you don't hurt people, you don't take their stuff, and they think, oh yeah, well, I know that. I've been taught that since I was like 3 years old. We all teach our kids that. So I'm going to get rid of our NPC friend here, because so yeah, we've all been taught that you don't do that stuff, but libertarians include the government in that. So the government should not initiate violence or aggression against others, and that includes agents of the government. So nobody should initiate acts of aggression against others. Now, October 7th, there were violations of the non-aggression principle. Members of Hamas went into Israel and violated the non-aggression principle. So they initiated aggression. It would have been appropriate for Israel to respond by addressing those members of Hamas in responding to that act of aggression. It does not follow that Israel can bomb a family's home who was not involved in October 7th at all. You see that? There's a difference there. If you go after the people who committed the crime, that's fine. You're not initiated aggression. The aggression was already initiated by the people you're going after. But if you go after other people, you are initiating aggression against those other people. That's the difference. And what we see in the war in Gaza is a lot of people who had nothing to do with October 7th are being slaughtered. And that needs to stop. We need to stand up to Netanyahu and say, not a dime more for your war. And well, I would just leave it at that. I was going to say until you stop killing these people, but we just need to cut off their funding and be like, we're not going to take part in this anymore. Now, a lot of Christians, especially evangelical Christians, which I consider myself one, I am an evangelical Christian, think that you need to carve out an exception for Israel. So they might be even against the war in Ukraine, saying that, yeah, America doesn't need to be involved in Ukraine. And I agree with them. But they carve out this exception for Israel because they say, well, the Bible says that those who bless Israel, God will bless. Those who curse Israel, God will curse. Therefore, we ought to bless Israel, and then we will be blessed. That's how their thinking goes. But I do want to look at this from a Christian and biblical perspective and think about what the nation state of Israel is from a biblical perspective. First, the idea of a nation state only goes back to people place it at various times, but in the mid 1600s, you had the Treaty of Westphalia, which was when a lot of people determined that nation states began to become prominent in the mid 1600s. Really, it was the 1800s after the Napoleonic Wars, whenever nation states really took off. But before that, nation states really weren't a thing. You had nations. You did have nations. Nations were, but they weren't associated with states. You had empires, but they weren't associated with nations. The idea of a nation state is something that's relatively new. So the idea of Israel being a nation state would have been unheard of to the church for the first 1600 years of its existence. So we know that whenever the Bible talks about Israel, it's not talking about a modern nation state of Israel. That would have been absurd to Christians throughout most of Christian history. So when the Bible talks about Israel, it talks about there are different things it could be talking about. It could be talking about Jacob. Jacob was a human being, and he wrestled with God, and God changed his name to Israel. So that man, his name is Israel. So sometimes when the Bible talks about Israel, it's talking about that single individual. But Israel, more often than that, in the Bible, is talked about as Jacob's descendants. He had 12 kids, and they all had kids, and then they had kids, and all those kids, those are the descendants of Israel, and that family is often called Israel, not a nation state, but a family. Finally, whenever that family got exceptionally large, it became a nation, which a nation is different than a state, and I think we lose that in modern society. We think of nation and state as being synonymous. They are not synonymous. They are different. A nation is a collection of people. A state is an organization that has a monopoly on violence over a given territory. These are not the same things. So when the Bible talks about the nation of Israel, it's talking about a large group of people who share a similar heritage. And so whenever the Jews were in Egypt, they were the nation of Israel. Now they were in a different country. They were in Egypt. They were exiled, or they were in slavery, but they were a nation of Israel. Whenever they left Egypt and they were wandering through the desert for 40 years, they were a nation. They were the nation of Israel. They didn't have a government on a monopoly on force. They had no homeland at that point, but they were a nation because a nation is a group of people. Um, so you had even through the times of judges, they were known as the nation of Israel. So you have this idea of Israel being a person, a family, a nation, and then finally with Samuel, you had Israel becoming a kingdom. So Samuel anoints the first king, and God is not happy about this. By the way, God was not happy with Samuel anointing the first king. He said, "Kings are going to you guys are going to become a state now, and kings are not going to be good. They're going to draft your sons and into wars. They're going to tax you excessively. It's just not going to be good. But if you're rejecting me, here you go. You'll get a king." So he gave them a king. That king was Saul. Then you had David. Then you had Solomon. Then you had Rehoboam. So you had a series of kings over Israel. That was known as the kingdom of Israel. Again, a kingdom is not what we have in Israel right now, is it? Who is the king? If Israel represents the kingdom of Israel from the Bible, who is their king? I mean, for my view on Israel, I believe the church is the new Israel. We have a king. His name is Jesus, but I don't know who the king is of Israel. So so you had a kingdom of Israel. Then eventually, Rehoboam he raises taxes on the people, which is never a good idea. Don't raise taxes. He raises taxes on people, and that causes a civil war. And then you have two kingdoms. You had the southern kingdom was now called Judah, which was the predominant tribe of the southern region. It wasn't the only tribe, but it was a predominant tribe of the southern region. And the northern region was still known as Israel, but it wasn't a united Israel. Judah was no longer part of it. Benjamin was no longer part of it. So you had this divided kingdom of Israel. And so you had Judah in the south, Israel in the north, and both of them had a bunch of bad kings. Israel had only bad kings. Like every king of Israel was a bad king. And then both the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, they both fell, and the people went into exile. The people were still a nation, though. They were still a nation. They were still people who shared a common ancestry, even though they didn't have a state. So the reason I give you this history is because my Christian friends, I want you to think about this. The modern nation state of Israel is not a kingdom. It's not the entire nation of Jews. I'm pretty sure there are more Jews living in the United States than there are in Israel. So the nation as a people group is all over the world. It's not located only in Israel. It's not the man Israel. So it is not. It's not what the Bible talks about whenever it says Israel. So you can be left off the hook about this whole Israel thing. It's not what the Bible talks about when it says Israel. Now, I think that the church is a new Israel. I do think that our Jewish friends who come to Christ are going to be double blessed because they are blessed people, and they will be double blessed coming to Christ. But this idea that the nation state of Israel is a special place that we need to allow to slaughter human beings because of some interpretation of the Bible that was just developed recently. This is just absurd.